Every evening at exactly 6:30, Rosa Santos would push her cart through the heavy glass doors of the Whitmore Music Academy. The wheels squeaked against the polished marble floor, echoing through the empty hallways like a lonely song. Behind her walked 15-year-old Sophia, carrying a smaller bucket filled with cleaning supplies and the weight of dreams she never dared speak aloud. The academy was nothing like the run-down apartment building where they lived. Here, crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings, and oil paintings of famous composers watched over students who arrived each day in expensive cars. Sophia had been coming here with her mother for 3 years now, ever since her father disappeared, one night leaving behind only unpaid bills and broken promises. Rosa worked hard to keep them afloat. During the day, she cleaned offices downtown. In the evening, she scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans at the academy. On weekends, she did laundry for wealthy families in the suburbs. Her hands were rough and red from constant work, but her eyes still held kindness. She never complained, even when Sophia could see how tired she was. Sophia understood why her mother took the academy job despite the low pay. The work was steady, and nobody bothered them. Most importantly, they could finish their shift together and walk home safely through the dangerous neighborhood where they lived. But what Rosa didn't know was that these evening hours had become something magical for her daughter. While Rosa cleaned the administrative offices upstairs, Sophia was supposed to vacuum the practice rooms and empty wastebaskets. But she found herself moving slower and slower each night, lingering outside doors where music spilled into the hallways like golden light. She learned to time her work perfectly, arriving at each practice room just as students began their lessons. Through thin walls, she absorbed everything. She learned that the angry-sounding piece with all the fast notes was called a Chopin etude. She discovered that when Professor Williams made students play scales for 20 minutes, it wasn't punishment, but preparation. She figured out that the sad, beautiful melody that made her chest feel tight was Pachelbel's canon, and that the wild, stormy piece that gave her goosebumps was something called the Revolutionary Etude. Sophia's ears became like recording devices. She could replay entire lessons in her mind while lying in bed at night. She knew that Jennifer, the blonde girl in room 5, struggled with her left hand during Bach pieces. She understood that Daniel, the serious boy who always wore black, had perfect technique but no emotion in his playing. She even recognized when Professor Chen was having a bad day, because his corrections became sharper and more frequent. The practice rooms each had windows, and Sophia learned to clean them very, very slowly. She watched fingers dance across black and white keys, memorizing hand positions and pedal movements. She saw how advanced students sat straighter, how their wrists curved just so, how they breathed with the music instead of fighting against it. She noticed that the best players didn't just press keys, they seemed to pull music from the piano like drawing water from a well. One evening, while cleaning room 7, Sophia witnessed something that changed everything. A new student, clearly nervous, was struggling through a simple piece. Professor Williams stopped her repeatedly, growing frustrated. Finally, he sat down at the piano himself and played the same passage. The difference was like night and day. Where the student had played individual notes, the professor played a story. Where the student had mechanical precision, the professor had flowing emotion. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She hummed the melody over and over, her fingers moving against her blanket as if it were a keyboard. She found herself wondering what it would feel like to create such beauty, to transform silence into something that could make people cry or laugh, or remember their first love. The next day at school was torture. While her classmates talked about television shows and weekend plans, Sophia's mind wandered to diminished sevenths and crescendos. During math class, she found herself tapping out rhythms on her desk. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, asked if she was okay. Sophia just nodded and tried to focus on fractions, but her heart was somewhere else entirely. At lunch, she sat alone as usual. The other students had given up trying to include her years ago. Sophia wasn't unfriendly exactly, but she lived in a different world. While they worried about new clothes and cell phones, she worried about whether her mother's cough was getting worse, whether the landlord would raise their rent again, whether the electricity would get cut off if Rosa missed another payment. But lately, she had a new worry that felt different from the others. This worry wasn't heavy and dark like the rest. It was more like an ache, the way your stomach feels when you're really hungry but there's no food in the house. Except this hunger wasn't for food. It was for something she couldn't name, something that lived in the spaces between musical notes. That evening, Rosa seemed more tired than usual. She moved slowly as they walked to the academy, pausing twice to catch her breath. Sophia noticed, but didn't say anything. They both knew Rosa couldn't afford to take a sick day, even if she needed one. "Mija," Rosa said as they entered the building, "I need to spend extra time in Professor Wilson's office tonight. She spilled coffee all over her carpet yesterday, and it's starting to smell. Can you handle the practice rooms by yourself?" Sophia nodded, trying not to show how excited this made her. Being alone in the practice rooms meant she could take even more time, could listen even more carefully. As Rosa disappeared upstairs with her heavy cart, Sophia began her rounds. The evening lessons were different on Tuesdays. Instead of individual, students, small groups gathered for ensemble practice. Sophia found herself outside room 12, where 4 advanced students were working on a piano quartet. The music was unlike anything she had heard before, 4 parts weaving together like voices in conversation, sometimes arguing, sometimes agreeing, always creating something bigger than any one part alone. She pressed her ear closer to the door. The piano part was incredibly complex, requiring the player to switch between supporting the melody and taking the lead. The student playing it was good, but Sophia could hear places where the rhythm dragged slightly, where the emotional intensity didn't quite match what the other instruments were doing. Without thinking, Sophia found herself humming along, her voice naturally filling in the gaps she heard in the performance. She imagined her hands on the keys, correcting the timing, adding the emphasis that would make the melody soar. Lost in the music, she didn't notice that the practice room had gone quiet. The door opened suddenly. 4 students and Professor Kim stared out at her in surprise. Sophia's face burned with embarrassment. She grabbed her cleaning supplies and mumbled an apology, rushing away as fast as she could without actually running. But Professor Kim didn't look angry. He looked curious. He watched Sophia disappear around the corner, then turned back to his students. "Did anyone else hear that humming? It was perfectly in tune with what we were playing." Sophia spent the rest of the evening avoiding that hallway. She finished her cleaning quickly and waited by the main entrance for her mother, her heart still pounding from the embarrassment. When Rosa finally appeared, looking exhausted, Sophia was ready to leave immediately. On the walk home, Rosa noticed her daughter's unusual quietness. "Everything okay, Mija? You seem worried about something." Sophia considered telling her mother about the humming incident but decided against it. Rosa had enough to worry about without adding Sophia's embarrassing moments to the list. Instead, she took her mother's arm and helped support her as they walked the 6 blocks home. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days. The elevator hadn't worked in 2 years, so they climbed the stairs slowly, Rosa stopping on each landing to rest. Their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was cooking something that smelled like garlic and ginger. From apartment 3B came the sound of a television, turned up too loud, and a baby crying. Their own apartment was small but clean. Rosa insisted on that, no matter how tired she was. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that served as Rosa's sewing space in the evenings. Sophia had learned not to complain about the thin walls or the radiator that clanged all night, in winter. This place was shelter, and shelter was not something to take for granted. That night, after Rosa had fallen asleep, Sophia lay in her bed listening to the sounds of the building settling around her. But instead of sirens and shouting from the street below, her mind was filled with the music from room 12. She replayed every note, every harmony, every moment where the 4 instruments had come together perfectly. She thought about Professor Kim's curious expression, about the way the students had looked at her. For just a moment, she had been part of their musical world instead of just observing it from outside. The feeling had been terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Sophia closed her eyes and let her fingers move against the blanket again, playing along with the music in her memory. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered a dangerous thought. What if she didn't have to remain an observer forever? What if, somehow, someday, she could be the one making the music instead of just listening to it? But that was impossible, wasn't it? People like her didn't become musicians, they became cleaners or store. 3 weeks had passed since the humming incident, and Sophia had successfully avoided Professor Kim and his students. She had memorized their schedule and made sure to clean their practice room either before they arrived or after they left. The embarrassment still burned in her chest whenever she thought about it, but something else burned there too. A growing restlessness that made her feel like she might explode if she didn't find some way to release it. Tuesday evening arrived, gray and drizzling. Rosa had been fighting a cold all week, and this morning she had woken up with a fever. Sophia begged her to stay home, but Rosa just shook her head and reached for her uniform. We can't afford for me to miss work, mija. You know this. But by afternoon, Rosa's condition had worsened. She was dizzy and weak, barely able to stand. Their neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, took one look at her and declared that she was going to the emergency clinic, whether she liked it or not. Sophia, Rosa said, her voice hoarse and tired, I need you to go to the academy tonight. Mr. Peterson is expecting the building to be cleaned, and if we don't show up, he might fire us. Do you think you can handle it alone? Sophia's heart jumped, but she tried to keep her voice steady. Of course, Mama, don't worry about anything, just get better. Mrs. Garcia helped Rosa down the stairs while Sophia gathered both her mother's cleaning supplies and her own. The cart was heavier than she expected, and she struggled to push it the 6 blocks to the academy. By the time she arrived, her arms ached and she was breathing hard. The building felt different when she was completely alone. During the day, it bustled with hundreds of students and teachers. In the evenings with her mother, it was quiet but still alive with the sounds of practice sessions. But now, at nearly 8 o'clock, it felt like a sleeping giant. Sophia's footsteps echoed as she made her way through the main hallway. The portraits of famous composers seemed to watch her with disapproving eyes. She tried to ignore them and focus on her work, but the silence was so complete it felt like being inside a tomb. She started with the administrative offices upstairs, the way Rosa always did. Professor Wilson's carpet still smelled faintly of coffee, despite Rosa's efforts to clean it. Sophia scrubbed at the stain again, trying to get it completely out. She wanted everything to be perfect, to prove that she could handle this responsibility. The work took longer than expected when you were doing it alone. Each office had to be dusted, vacuumed, and mopped. Waste baskets had to be emptied and new liners installed. By the time she finished upstairs, it was nearly 10 o'clock, and she still had all the practice rooms to do. Sophia pushed her cart down to the main floor, her muscles already tired from the unfamiliar work. The practice rooms were easier, mostly just emptying trash and wiping down piano benches, but there were 24 of them. She fell into a rhythm, moving from room to room, trying not to think about how her feet were starting to hurt. It was in room 18 that she found the sheet music. Someone had left a piece on the piano stand, probably by accident. Sophia recognized it immediately. It was the Chopin piece that Jennifer from room 5 had been struggling with for weeks. Sophia had heard her play it dozens of times, had mentally corrected the same mistakes over and over again. She picked up the sheet music, intending to put it in the lost and found box. But instead, she found herself staring at the notes on the page. For 3 years she had listened to music without ever seeing how it looked written down. Now, holding the actual notation, she felt like she was seeing a secret language revealed. The notes weren't just black dots on lines. They were instructions, a map that showed exactly how to create the sounds she had been hearing. She could see where the melody climbed higher, where it fell into those haunting low notes that made her shiver. She could see the rhythm spelled out in the different shapes of the notes, the dynamics marked with letters she was beginning to understand. Sophia set the music back on the stand and continued her cleaning, but her mind was spinning. When she Finished room 18, she found herself walking more slowly past the other pianos. In room 20, someone had left a Bach piece open. In room 22, a Debussy nocturne sat waiting for tomorrow's lesson. By the time she reached the concert hall, Sophia felt like her brain was about to overflow. The concert hall was the most magnificent room in the building, with soaring ceilings and rows of red velvet seats. At the center of the stage sat the Academy's prized possession, a 9-foot Steinway grand piano that Sophia had only seen from a distance. Under the soft stage lights, the piano looked like something from a fairy. Tally. The black surface was so polished she could see her reflection in it. The keys seemed to glow with their own inner light. Sophia had been cleaning around pianos for 3 years, but she had never been this close to one so beautiful. She was supposed to dust the bench and wipe down the music stand, nothing more. But as she approached the piano, something strange happened. All the music she had been absorbing for 3 years seemed to come alive in her mind at once. She could hear the Chopin piece from room 18, the Bach from room 20, the Debussy from room 22. They wove together in her imagination, creating something new and urgent. Sophia looked around the empty hall. The silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. Her mother wasn't there to worry about. The professors were all gone. Even the security guard was making his rounds on the upper floors. For the first time in her life, she was completely alone with a piano. Her hands were shaking as she approached the bench. She had watched hundreds of students sit down at pianos, had memorized the way they adjusted their posture and positioned their feet. But knowing how something looked and actually doing it were very different things. The bench was the perfect height. Sophia's feet in her worn sneakers just reached the pedals. She placed her hands on the keys the way she had seen Professor Williams demonstrate so many times. The keys felt cool and smooth under her fingers, like touching water or moonlight. She pressed middle C, just one note. The sound that emerged was pure and clear, filling the entire hall. Sophia had heard that note thousands of times, but she had never created it herself. The feeling was indescribable, like she had just spoken her first word or taken her first breath. Encouraged, she pressed a few more notes. C, D, E, F, G. A simple scale, but coming from her own fingers, it sounded like magic. She tried it, with her left hand, then both hands together. The coordination was harder than it looked, but her hands seemed to remember what they had observed all these months. Then, without quite deciding to do it, Sophia began to play the melody from the Debussy piece she had seen earlier. Her right hand picked out the notes slowly, carefully. Some of them were wrong. She was guessing at parts she couldn't quite remember. But the basic shape of the melody was there. The sound of her own playing was so overwhelming that Sophia didn't notice the footsteps in the hallway outside. She didn't hear the concert hall door open quietly. She was lost in the miracle of creation, of turning the music in her mind into something real and beautiful. She played the melody again, this time adding some notes with her left hand. It wasn't right exactly, but it was closer to what she heard, in her memory. Her confidence grew with each phrase. Her fingers moved more naturally across the keys, finding their way to the notes almost by instinct. The third time through, something clicked. Sophia stopped thinking about individual notes and started feeling the music as a whole. Her hands found a rhythm that matched her breathing. The melody began to flow instead of stumbling. For a few moments, she forgot where she was, forgot who she was, forgot everything except the connection between her heart and her hands and the voice of the piano. When she finally stopped playing, the silence that followed was different from the emptiness she had felt earlier. This silence was full, pregnant with the echo of music that had just been born. Sophia sat very still, her hands still resting on the keys, hardly believing what had just happened. She had made music. Real music. Not perfect, not professional, but undeniably, impossibly real. A sound from the back of the hall made her spin around, her heart lurching with terror. She had been so absorbed in playing that she hadn't heard anyone enter. Now, silhouetted in the doorway stood a figure she couldn't quite make out in the dim light. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please don't tell my mother. She'll lose her job. I'll never touch a piano again, I promise. Just please." But the figure was walking closer, and as he stepped into the stage lights, Sophia saw something that confused her completely. The man, approaching her, wasn't angry. He wasn't stern or disapproving. Instead, his face wore an expression of wonder, as if he had just witnessed something miraculous. "My dear child," he said softly, his voice kind but filled with something that might have been awe. "How long have you been playing piano?" Sophia's mind went blank. This was the moment she had always feared, being caught where she didn't belong, doing something she had no right to do. But the question wasn't what she had expected, and neither was the gentle tone in which it was asked. I don't play piano, sir," she managed to whisper. I listen. My mother cleans here and I listen." The man stepped closer and Sophia could see his face clearly now. Sophia barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear the piano calling to her, could feel the smooth keys under her fingertips. Dr. Whitmore's words echoed in her mind. "It's going to change your life." But what did that mean exactly? And more importantly, what would her mother say? Rosa was feeling better the next morning, though still weak from her illness. She insisted on making Sophia breakfast before school, standing at the stove in her bathrobe, stirring eggs with one hand while holding a tissue to her nose with the other. "How did the cleaning go last night, mija?" Rosa asked, not turning around. "Any problems?" Sophia almost choked on her orange juice. How could she explain what had happened? How could she tell her mother that she had touched the academy's most expensive piano, that she had been caught by the owner himself, that they were supposed to meet him tonight? "It was fine, Mama. Everything got done." Rosa nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'll be able to go with you tonight. This cold is almost gone." Sophia felt her stomach twist. "Actually, Mama, Dr. Whitmore wants to meet with us tonight at 7 o'clock in his office." Rosa froze, the wooden spoon halfway to her mouth for tasting. Slowly, she turned around, her face pale with worry. "Dr. Whitmore? The owner? Sophia? What happened? Did you break something? Did someone complain?" "No, Mama, nothing like that. He wants to talk to us." But Rosa was already spiraling into panic. Sophia could see her mother's mind racing through all the worst possibilities. Lost job, ruined reputation, no money for rent. Rosa had spent 3 years being invisible at the academy, never causing problems, never drawing attention. The idea that the owner himself wanted to speak with them could only mean disaster. "What did you do?" Rosa whispered, sinking into a chair. "Sophia, tell me exactly what happened." Sophia looked at her mother's frightened face and made a decision. She couldn't explain about the piano, not yet. Rosa was too worried, too fragile from being sick. It would have to wait until they were sitting in Dr. Whitmore's office. "I don't know why he wants to see us, Mama. Maybe he just wants to check on how the cleaning is going. You've been working there for 3 years without any problems. I'm sure it's nothing bad." But Rosa wasn't convinced. She spent the entire day cleaning their apartment obsessively, as if having everything perfect at home could somehow prevent disaster at work. She ironed Sophia's school uniform twice, then pressed her own best dress, the one she wore to church on Sundays. At school, Sophia couldn't concentrate on anything. During English class, while her teacher discussed metaphors in poetry, Sophia thought about how music was like poetry too, how both used beauty to say things that regular words couldn't express. In math class, she found herself thinking about how musical rhythms were mathematical, how the timing of notes created patterns just like equations. Her friend Carlos noticed her distraction at lunch. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, biting into his sandwich. "Everything okay at home?" Sophia and Carlos had been friends since elementary school. He was one of the few people who knew about her mother's jobs, about their financial struggles. But she had never told him about her fascination with the Academy's music. It seemed too private, too precious to share. "Just family stuff," she said, which was true enough. Carlos studied her face with concern. He had thick black hair that always fell into his eyes and a crooked smile that made him popular with their classmates. Sophia sometimes wondered if he would still be her friend if she suddenly became someone different, someone whose life didn't revolve around worry and work. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? He said seriously. Sophia nodded, but her throat felt tight. What if Dr. Whitmore's offer was real? What if her life really was about to change? Would she lose the few friendships she had? Would she fit anywhere at all? The school day crawled by with agonizing slowness. When the final bell rang, Sophia walked home to find Rosa sitting at their small kitchen table, staring at her hands. She had been crying. "Mama, what's wrong?" "I keep thinking about all the things I might have done wrong," Rosa said quietly. "Maybe I missed a spot somewhere, or used the wrong cleaning product on something expensive. Maybe someone complained that we were too slow or too loud." Sophia sat down across from her mother and took her hands. Rosa's fingers were rough from years of hard work, but they were gentle and warm. "Mama, you're the best cleaner they have. Everyone knows that. You've never done anything wrong." But Rosa's fears weren't really about cleaning, and they both knew it. Rosa's fears were about survival, about the constant terror of losing the little stability they had managed to build. One missed payment, one lost job, one medical emergency could destroy everything they had worked for. At 6:30 they left, for the academy. Rosa had chosen her outfit carefully. The navy blue dress that was professional but not too fancy. The black shoes that were comfortable enough for cleaning, but nice enough for meetings. She carried a small purse that contained their rent receipts, Sophia's school records, and a letter of recommendation from their previous landlord. Rosa always carried these documents when she was nervous, as if having proof of their respectability could protect them from disaster. The academy looked different in the evening light. During the day, it buzzed with activity, students hurrying between classes, professors carrying coffee and sheet music, parents arriving in expensive cars for pickup. But now it was quieter, more formal. The marble floors gleamed under the chandeliers, and the portraits of famous composers seemed more imposing in the dim light. Dr. Whitmore's office was on the 3rd floor, behind a heavy wooden door marked with a brass nameplate. Rosa knocked softly, her hand trembling slightly. "Come in," came a warm voice from inside. Dr. Whitmore's office was exactly what Sophia had expected. Walls lined with books about music, framed photographs of famous musicians, and a beautiful upright piano in the corner. But what she hadn't expected was that Dr. Whitmore wasn't alone. 2 other people sat in the comfortable chairs facing his desk. One was a woman with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, wearing a burgundy suit that spoke of quiet wealth and authority. The other was a younger man, maybe in his 30s, with the kind of intense, focused energy that Sophia associated with the academy's most serious professors. "Mrs. Santos, Sophia," Dr. Whitmore said, standing to greet them. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." Rosa perched on the edge of her chair, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. Sophia sat beside her, trying to read the expressions of the strangers in the room. "Mrs. Santos," Dr. Whitmore began gently. "First, let me assure you that neither you nor Sophia are in any trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. Last night, I had the privilege of discovering something extraordinary, and I wanted you to hear about it from me personally." Rosa's grip on her purse relaxed slightly, but her face remained tense with worry. Dr. Whitmore turned to Sophia. "Would you like to tell your mother what happened last night, or would you prefer that I do it?" Sophia's mouth went dry. The moment she had been dreading all day had arrived. I played the piano, Mama." Rosa's eyes widened in confusion. "You what?" "The piano in the concert hall. I sat down and played it. Dr. Whitmore heard me." Rosa looked back and forth between Sophia and Dr. Whitmore, trying to process this information. But Sophia doesn't know how to play piano. We could never afford lessons." "That's exactly what makes this so remarkable," Dr. Whitmore said. "Mrs. Santos, your daughter played complex classical pieces from memory, with interpretation and feeling that would be impressive in a student who had been taking lessons for years. She did this purely from listening to lessons while you both worked here." The silver-haired woman leaned forward. "Mrs. Santos, I'm Professor Elizabeth Chen, head of our piano department. Dr. Whitmore called me at home last night and asked me to come in today to meet Sophia. What he's describing It's almost unheard of. Rosa looked at Sophia with an expression that mixed pride, confusion, and fear. Is this true, mija? You really played piano? Sophia nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. I'm sorry, Mama. I know I shouldn't have touched it. I know we could get in trouble. But I couldn't help it. The music was it was inside me and I had to let it out. Instead of anger, Rosa's face crumpled with understanding. She pulled Sophia into a hug, whispering, Oh, mija, I should have known. All those times I caught you humming while we worked. The way you would stop and listen outside the practice rooms, I should have realized. The younger man cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Santos, I'm David Rodriguez, a concert pianist who graduated from this academy 15 years ago. I'm in town for a series of performances and Dr. Whitmore asked me to come hear Sophia play. I hope you'll allow her to demonstrate what she can do. Rosa looked terrified again. You want her to play? Here? Now? But she's just a child and she's had no training. That's precisely why this is so important, Professor Chen said kindly. Mrs. Santos, musical talent like this is incredibly rare. To ignore it would be a tragedy. Dr. Whitmore gestured toward the upright piano in the corner of his office. Sophia, would you be willing to play something for your mother and our guests? Sophia looked at Rosa, who nodded slowly, still looking bewildered by the turn of events. Sophia's first official lesson was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, just 2 days after the life-changing meeting in Dr. Whitmore's office. She had barely been able to concentrate in school, her mind constantly drifting to what lay ahead. Her regular classes seemed trivial now. What did algebra matter when she was about to begin learning the language of music? Rosa had spent those 2 days in a state of nervous excitement, cleaning their apartment obsessively and calling her sister in Phoenix 3 times to share the incredible news. Can you believe it, Elena? Our Sophia, a musician, at the fancy academy. But Sophia felt the weight of expectations building like storm clouds. What if her playing the other night had been a fluke? What if, under proper instruction, she turned out to be just ordinary? What if she disappointed these people who had shown such faith in her? When Thursday arrived, Sophia found herself standing outside the academy's main entrance at exactly 3:15, her hands sweating despite the cool afternoon air. She wore her best dress, actually her only dress besides her school uniform, and carried a notebook that Rosa had insisted she bring for taking notes. The academy felt different now that she was entering as a student rather than a cleaner's daughter. The security guard, Mr. Thompson, who had always nodded politely but distantly when she passed with her mother, now greeted her with genuine warmth. You must be Sophia. Professor Chen is expecting you in Studio A. That's on the 2nd floor. 3rd. Door on the right. Congratulations, young lady. We're all excited to see what you can do. Studio A was smaller than the concert hall but more intimate, with excellent acoustics and a beautiful Yamaha grand piano positioned to catch the afternoon light from tall windows. Professor Chen was already there, arranging sheet music on the piano's music stand. Sophia, welcome to your new life, Professor Chen said with a smile. Are you ready to begin? Sophia nodded, though her mouth had gone dry with nervousness. Good. First things first, let's talk about what we heard the other night. Your ability to play by ear is remarkable, but it's also going to be both a blessing and a challenge. Students who learn primarily by ear sometimes struggle with reading music because their brains want to rely on what they've heard rather than what they see. Professor Chen gestured for Sophia to sit at the piano bench. I want you to play that Debussy piece one more time, but this time I'm going to give you the actual sheet music. I want you to try to follow along as you play. Sophia looked down at the notation spread before her. 2 nights ago, sheet music had seemed like a secret code. Now, with Professor Chen pointing out the melody line and explaining the basics of treble clef, it began to make sense. The dots and lines weren't mysterious. They were simply another way of writing down what she already heard in her head. As she played, Professor Chen occasionally stopped her to point out specific notations. See this little P here? That means piano. Soft. And this crescendo marking means gradually get louder. You were already doing these things instinctively, but now you can see how composers communicate their intentions. The lesson flew by faster than any hour Sophia had ever experienced. They worked on hand position, proper posture, and basic music theory. Professor Chen introduced her to scales, not the simple ones Sophia had experimented with, but the complex patterns that formed the foundation of classical music. Your ear is so good that you've been compensating for gaps in technique, Professor Chen explained. Now we need to make your technique as strong as your musical instincts. When the lesson ended, Sophia felt simultaneously exhilarated and exhausted. Her brain was stuffed with new information and her hands ached from practicing unfamiliar finger exercises. How did it feel? Professor Chen asked as Sophia gathered her things. Like drinking from a fire hose, Sophia said honestly, making Professor Chen laugh. That's perfectly normal. Sophia, I want you to know that David Rodriguez has been telling everyone he knows about your performance the other night. He's arranged for some colleagues to visit the academy next week. Would you be comfortable playing for a small group of professional musicians? Sophia's stomach dropped. Professional musicians? Like people who perform for a living? Yes, but don't let that intimidate you. These are people who understand what they heard in Dr. Whitmore's description. They're coming because they want to witness something extraordinary, not because they expect you to be perfect. That night at dinner, Sophia told Rosa about her lesson and the upcoming performance. Rosa nearly choked on her rice and beans. Professional musicians? Coming here to hear you? Sophia, what if you make mistakes? Mama, I'm going to make mistakes. I've had one lesson. But Professor Chen says that's not what they're coming to hear. Rosa looked worried, the same expression she wore when the rent was due and money was tight. Mija, I just want to make sure we're not getting in over our heads. These people, they live in a different world from us. Sophia understood her mother's fear. They had spent years being invisible, staying in their lane, not reaching for things that seemed beyond their grasp. This new world of music and possibility felt dangerous in its vastness. But that night, lying in bed, Sophia found herself thinking about the feeling of her fingers on the piano keys, the moment when music flowed through her like electricity. Whatever happened with the visiting musicians, she couldn't go back to just listening from the hallway. The next week passed in a blur of intensive lessons. Professor Chen had arranged for Sophia to have daily sessions, compressed learning that would normally take months into a crash course. They worked on sight reading, advanced finger exercises, and music theory. Sophia learned about key signatures, time signatures, and the mathematical relationships that made harmony possible. But more than technical skills, she was learning about music as a language of emotion. Professor Chen taught her how composers, like Chopin, used specific chord progressions to evoke longing, how Bach's counterpoint created mathematical beauty, how Debussy painted with sound, the way Impressionist artists painted with light. Music isn't just about playing the right notes at the right time, Professor Chen explained during their Wednesday lesson. It's about communicating feelings that words can't express. The technique is important, but it's just the vocabulary. The real music happens when you use that vocabulary to say something meaningful. Friday afternoon, the visiting musicians began arriving. Sophia watched from the window of Studio A as expensive cars pulled up to the academy's main entrance. Professor Chen had explained who was coming. Dr. Helen Martinez, a renowned piano pedagogue from the New England Conservatory. James Wilson, principal pianist with the Metropolitan Symphony. And Dr. Patricia Kumar, a musicologist who specialized in child prodigies. They're not here to judge you, Professor Chen reminded Sophia as they warmed up. They're here because David Rodriguez told them they had to hear something impossible. Just play the way you've been playing all week. But Sophia's hands were shaking as the visitors filed into Studio A. These people carried themselves with the quiet confidence of those who had devoted their lives to musical excellence. Dr. Martinez wore an elegant black suit and had the bearing of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. James Wilson looked exactly like Sophia imagined a symphony musician should look. Serious, focused, with calloused fingertips that spoke of countless hours of practice. Dr. Kumar was younger than the others, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses, and an expression of genuine curiosity. Dr. Whitmore made brief introductions, explaining Sophia's background and the circumstances of her discovery. Sophia noticed that he didn't oversell her abilities or make grand claims. He simply stated the facts. 15 years old, no formal training, learned entirely by ear while her mother cleaned the academy. Sophia, Dr. Whitmore said gently, "Would you be willing to play something for our guests?" Sophia nodded and sat down at the piano. She had decided to start with the Debussy piece since it was the one she felt most confident about. But as her fingers touched the keys, something unexpected happened. Instead of the careful, studied performance she had planned, Sophia found herself playing with the same unconscious freedom she had felt that first night alone in the concert hall. The music poured out of her, carrying all the emotions she had been feeling over the past week. Excitement, fear, gratitude, and a deep, wordless love for the sounds she was creating. When she finished, the silence in the room was so complete that Sophia could hear her own heartbeat. She turned around to find the visiting musicians staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to disbelief. Dr. Martinez was the first to speak. How is this possible? The musical maturity, the natural phrasing. I have doctoral students who can't play with that kind of sensitivity. James Wilson leaned forward in his chair. Sophia, may I ask you to play something else? Something you've learned more recently? Sophia chose a Bach invention that Professor Chen had introduced her to just 3 days earlier. It was technically more challenging than the Debussy, requiring both hands to play independent melodic lines simultaneously. Sophia had struggled with it during lessons, but now, in front of this audience, the two melodies seemed to weave together naturally. 6 months had passed since that first evening when Sophia sat down at the concert hall piano, and her life had become unrecognizable. What had once been stolen moments listening outside practice rooms had transformed into 8-hour days of intensive musical study. Her hands, once soft from helping with cleaning, now bore the calluses of a serious pianist. Her mind, once filled with worries about rent and groceries, now buzzed with counterpoint exercises and harmonic analysis. The Whitmore Academy had become Sophia's second home. She arrived each morning at 8 o'clock and rarely left before 6 in the evening. Professor Chen had designed a comprehensive curriculum that covered not just piano performance but music theory, composition, music history, and even basic German and Italian for understanding vocal pieces. Sophia absorbed it all with the same hunger that had driven her to listen outside practice room doors. But the transformation hadn't been easy. There were days when Sophia felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information she needed to master. Classical music, she discovered, required not just talent but an enormous breadth of knowledge. Understanding a Beethoven sonata meant knowing about the composer's life, the historical period, the musical forms he was working within, and the specific techniques required to bring out the emotional content of the piece. More challenging than the academic work was learning to navigate her new social environment. The other academy students had grown up in a world of music lessons and summer camps, concert subscriptions, and family friends who were professional musicians. They spoke casually about auditions for prestigious competitions, about their plans to attend conservatories whose names Sophia was just learning to recognize. At first, Sophia had felt like an imposter among them. During her first group masterclass, a student named Rebecca had mentioned that her grandmother had studied with a famous Russian teacher whose name everyone seemed to know except Sophia. Another student, Trevor, casually referenced a performance he had attended at Carnegie Hall the previous summer. Sophia nodded along, pretending to understand references that were completely foreign to her. But Professor Chen had noticed Sophia's discomfort during those early weeks. Sophia, she had said after a particularly challenging masterclass, I want you to remember something. Those students have had advantages you haven't had, but they don't have what you have. Technical knowledge can be learned. Musical sensitivity like yours is born, not made. Gradually, Sophia found her place among her fellow students. Her extraordinary ear meant that she could help them with intonation problems they couldn't hear themselves. Her ability to learn complex pieces quickly earned their respect. Most importantly, when she played in masterclasses, the room fell silent in a way that spoke of genuine admiration rather than mere politeness. The first major milestone had come in January, when Sophia performed her debut recital at the Academy. Dr. Whitmore had insisted that it be a significant event, inviting music critics from local newspapers and members of the city's cultural community. Sophia had been terrified, but Professor Chen had prepared her meticulously. The program had been carefully chosen to showcase Sophia's range and musical maturity. She opened with a Bach prelude and fugue, demonstrating her technical precision and understanding of Baroque style. She followed with a Chopin nocturne that highlighted her natural lyricism and emotional depth. The centerpiece was a Mozart sonata that required both technical excellence and classical restraint. She closed with a contemporary piece by a living composer, showing that her musical curiosity extended beyond the standard repertoire. Rosa had sat in the front row that night, wearing a new dress that Dr. Whitmore had insisted on purchasing for her. Seeing her mother's face during the performance, pride mixed with amazement, as if she couldn't quite believe that this poised young woman on stage was her daughter, had given Sophia strength she didn't know she possessed. The review in the Thai City newspaper the next week had been more positive than anyone had dared hope. Sophia Santos represents something genuinely special in the world of classical music, the critic had written. Her performance last night combined technical mastery with an emotional maturity that belied her age. This is a young artist to watch, but perhaps more meaningful than the newspaper review had been the response from Sophia's former classmates at her old school. Carlos had come to the recital with several of their friends, and afterward he had hugged her tightly, tears in his eyes. "I always knew you were special," he had whispered. "But this, Sophia, you're going to be famous someday." The prediction hadn't seemed so far-fetched when, 2 weeks later, Sophia received her acceptance letter to the prestigious Meadowmount Summer Music Program. Dr. Martinez had been true to her word, and Sophia's audition recording had earned her a full scholarship to one of the most competitive programs in the country. "This is where your real education begins," Professor Chen had explained when the letter arrived. "Meadowmount is where you'll meet other young musicians at your level. You'll be challenged in ways that aren't possible here, no matter how hard we work." The 6 weeks at Meadowmount had indeed transformed Sophia's understanding of what it meant to be a serious musician. She lived in a dormitory with teenagers from around the world, all of whom shared her obsessive dedication to music. She practiced 6 hours a day, attended master classes with internationally renowned teachers, and performed in recitals almost every week. But more than the technical training, Meadowmount had taught Sophia about the culture of classical music. She learned about the legendary rivalries between famous pianists, about the unwritten rules that governed conservatory life, about the business side of music that determined which talented musicians actually became successful professionals. She also learned about sacrifice. Her roommate, a violinist from Korea named Min Jung, practiced 8 hours a day and had given up virtually every other activity in pursuit of musical excellence. Another friend, a cellist named Gabriel from Brazil, had left his family at age 12 to study in Europe. These young musicians had talents comparable to Sophia's, but they had paid prices for their development that Sophia was only beginning to understand. The highlight of the summer had been Sophia's solo performance with the Meadowmount Orchestra. She had played the Mozart Piano Concerto No. 23, a piece that required her to balance technical brilliance with classical elegance while collaborating with 40 other musicians. The performance had been recorded, and when Sophia listened to it, afterward, she barely recognized herself as the pianist. "That's not me," she had said to Professor Chen during their first lesson after her return from summer camp. "That is absolutely you," Professor Chen had replied firmly. "That's you with proper training, proper preparation, and proper support. That's what you're capable of when all the pieces fall into place." The fall semester had brought new challenges and opportunities. Sophia was now taking advanced harmony and counterpoint classes with graduate students, studying languages to prepare for eventual conservatory auditions, and learning pieces that would have been unimaginable for her just a year earlier. More significantly, she had begun attracting attention from the larger musical world. James Wilson had been true to his word, and Sophia had performed twice with the Metropolitan Symphony in their educational concerts. The second performance, a solo appearance playing Grieg's Piano Concerto, had been broadcast on the local classical radio station. The radio broadcast had led to an invitation that still made Sophia's head spin. The International Young Artists Competition, one of the most prestigious contests for musicians under 18, had invited her to compete in their upcoming competition. The winner would receive a cash prize, management representation, and debut recitals in major cities. Sophia, Dr. Whitmore had said when the invitation arrived, I want you to understand what this means. Musicians spend years preparing for competitions like this. Some of the participants will have been studying since they were 5 years old. Are you ready for that level of competition? Sophia had thought about the question seriously. A year ago, she had been invisible, the cleaning lady's daughter who listened to music from the hallway. Now she was being invited to compete against the most talented young musicians in the world. I'm ready, she had said finally. I may not win, but I'm ready to try. The months leading up to the competition had been the most intense period of Sophia's life. She worked with Professor Chen to select her repertoire, choosing pieces that would showcase her strengths while challenging her to grow technically and musically. She studied recordings of great pianists performing the same pieces, learning different interpretive approaches. She performed in master classes with visiting artists, receiving feedback that helped her refine her performances. But perhaps most importantly, she had worked with a sports psychologist that the Academy had hired to help her manage performance anxiety. Sophia had learned breathing techniques, visualization exercises, and mental strategies for staying focused under pressure. The competition was held in March at a major conservatory on the East Coast. Sophia and Rosa flew there together, Sophia's first time on an airplane, and stayed in a hotel that felt impossibly luxurious to both of them. The other competitors were exactly what Dr. Whitmore had